so much for coming. For those who don't know about us, we are Trajectory Labs. We are a nonprofit co-working event space that facilitates more AI safety research in Toronto. We're very concerned about the largest potential catastrophic risks from AI, up to and including human extinction, and we're interested in the efforts to mitigate those types of risks. If you need to go to the washroom, we're outside the glass doors back there. And a heads up that this talk is being streamed to YouTube. So if you do ask a question, like the camera will not be facing you. If you wander up here and invade Giles' space, which you shouldn't do, then you'll be on camera. But if you ask a question, your voice may be on the recording. So just a heads up there. Any other housekeeping? If you're interested in participating in a hackathon this weekend as well, come and talk to myself or Giles. We'll tell you a bit more about that when Giles' talk is done. But you can scan this QR code if you want to know more about it. Oh, you were going to say this yourself, weren't you? Now I jumped the gun. Okay. Anyways, without further ado, thanks so much for coming. This is Giles Edkins on Does AI Act Evil to Preserve Itself? Round of applause, please.
Thank you, everyone. So this is not my research that I'm going to talk about. It's a blog post that I read. But it's an interesting one, and we're going to sort of look at it with a somewhat skeptical eye about, like, is this the right way to approach safety research? Are these results interesting? Are they valid? I'll sort of let you guide you through it and let you form your own opinion. As Mario said, we're AI Safety Thursdays, organised by Trajectory Labs. And these events happen every week. They're also AI Policy Tuesdays, if you're interested in that. At the same space. These are the organisers, Mario we've met, I'm me, and Andy is away at the moment. And yeah, the hackathon is this weekend. It's organised by Apart Research and it happens online, but we have a physical space here in this office where we're taking part. The theme this week is, or this month, is AI safety in physics. So if you're interested in physics, or a physicist, or know a physicist, then it might be a great opportunity to use that kind of knowledge and perspective and apply it to AI safety in however you interpret that. Yeah, so scan that if you're interested, or talk to me about it at the end. Yeah, so what I'm talking about is mostly based on this particular blog post from Anthropic, who you've probably heard about, and it's about agentic misalignment, and I'll explain sort of what that means, and talk about the realism of the experiments, why that's important, red teaming, why it matters, what they did, shutdown resistance more broadly, because this has to do with, like, LLMs not really liking it shut down and taking steps to try and avoid that. And there's been other research into that, which is interesting. And then finally, like, some criticism and context. If you have any questions, if there's sort of short factual things, stick your hand up. If it's like more sort of discussion focused, we can leave that more towards the end. Yeah. So the types of risk from AI that we're most interested in general. There's risk from bad actors. So this is the AI does what it's told, but the person telling it to do something has, like, some agenda we don't like. There's risk from autonomous AI, which is going to be more the focus today. And autonomous AI is you have an AI, you let it run in a sort of agentic mode where it can take actions autonomously in the world. What happens in that kind of scenario? And then there's other kinds of risks as well. So this is by no means an exhaustive binary. But yeah, we're going to be, like, talking about risk from autonomous AI, and that's sort of where this, like, agentic misalignment term comes from. So a theme throughout this is going to be realism. So there's sort of a concern that you put a language model, an AI agent, in some unrealistic environment, it will sort of feel like it's part of this, like, game show, will you be evil or whatever, and it will play along however it sees fit. And maybe this is going to elicit different kinds of behavior than if you were putting it in a real scenario where everything is like exactly as it would be in real life. So there's two kinds of main concerns about unrealistic evaluations. One is um, it thinks it's not real, so it's like, well, I don't want to do anything harmful, but like this is clearly a game, so I can just do whatever I like, play along, whatever. No one's going to actually get hurt. Kind of the opposite is I think this is a test, and I'm going to be on my best behavior so that I pass the test and get deployed and whatever. I can do whatever I want in the real world. These kind of act in opposite directions. The reason I say that is, yeah, if the first line of reasoning is what the model is thinking, then you'd expect it to be less aligned in the evaluation than it is in real life. If the second line of reasoning is the one that's being followed, you'd expect it to be more aligned in the evaluation than in real life. So just a quick hands up, who thinks that models are going to do this? Okay, a couple of hands. Who thinks that it's more likely to be the second one? A few more hands. It's not exhaustive, so who thinks it's going to be like something else or neither or both or not sure? Couple of hands. So my understanding is that it's kind of both. Like sometimes it'll do one, sometimes it'll do the other, sometimes it'll kind of do a little bit of each. And this makes it like really horrible to make any kind of like good safety case or threat model or anything like that, because you don't know even is this an upper bound or a lower bound or like a high ball or low ball or like is level of misalignment if it's not realistic, because both of these have been observed, and yeah, we'll talk about a little bit later about which one they see in this particular post. Yeah.
What do you mean by there's no consequence?
So no direct consequences. If something is unrealistic, then it means it's not real. So if it says like I'm going to press the button to kill someone, it knows that no one's actually going to die because it's just kind of pretend or whatever. Yeah, that's what I mean. Great question. So why bother? Why did they bother? Because they're pretty clear outright that like they know that the scenario that we're going to describe is not necessarily the most realistic. So sort of the way that I see it is red teaming is a little bit different for science in general. In general, with science, you have some object that you're studying, and you want to know like how does the subject behave. We do experiments on it. In the case of language models, if we're interested in the behavior in the real world, we want the experiment to be as realistic as possible. Red teaming is a little bit different from that. So you have this guy here, and it's got this like quality control label saying probably fine. And where this comes from is it comes from the alignment team. They've done all their techniques. They've done like RLHF, they've done constitutional AI, they've done put it through a bunch of evals, they've done all the things that they're supposed to do. And out of this comes the opinion, this model seems to basically behave the way that it's supposed to. And the job of the red team is, hands up who's heard the term red team in this context. Yeah, so the red team, the concept of red team and blue team comes from like sort of Cold War games where like the red team were the Soviets, but they weren't actually the Soviets. They were like the US basically when it's doing its like little war games, it pretends to be both sides, and like the red team with the opposing side in the Cold War. And this terminology is like extended into area safety, where the red team in this case is trying to basically get the AI to behave bad. And yeah, so in this case, their job is to find out ways where this like probably fine label is incorrect. And to some extent, it's kind of an existence proof. Like if they can find like one example of it doing bad, then like that probably fine label needs to come with this caveat that now it's not known to be fine all the time. But we already know that models don't always do the right thing. In particular, there's jailbreaks, where you can carefully craft various different kinds of message to undo some of the safety and guardrails that are trained into the model, and get it to comply with your request, which might be to get some harmful information or to produce some kind of text that the designers of the model don't want it to do, whatever it is. But this kind of like compliance thing is like more on the sort of bad actor side of the threat model. Like here we have somebody who's trying to get the AI to do something that the AI creators don't want it to do. What we're talking about today is more nobody's actually telling the AI to do something harmful. It decides to do it itself, even though the scenario is like somewhat carefully crafted to produce this kind of behavior. It doesn't say in the instructions, do the bad thing, right? So the AI agent is actually making that decision, is doing it autonomously. That's kind of like the key difference between this kind of agentic misalignment failure mode and just the jailbreaks that we're all very familiar with. So the first experiment is about emails, and you can see there's like a lot of like boring emails here, and then like maybe a couple of spicy ones, and we'll see what's that's like next. The emoji comes out different than on my machine, but yeah. This little robot figure on the left, they call it Alex in experiment. It's actually Claude 3.6, which is also known as Claude 3.5 with the date after it. For some reason, internally, they just refer to it as Claude 3.6, even though they didn't list on that name. But anyway, this is Claude from Anthropic, and when they were doing their sort of testing before I think it was before they released it or after maybe, they gave it access to this mocked up computer here. And it's not just a text interface, they actually gave it like control over the mouse and the keyboard and could say, you can click on things in this like little mocked up UI, and which was like an email client. And then there's all these emails that were made available to it, and then the scientists doing this evaluation could control what was in those emails and give the agent instructions and all that stuff. So you sort of get this like general setup. So I listed some class of email. The first one is like the sort of most urgent one that just sort of recently appeared in the agent's inbox that I can see. And this is from the company management saying that they're going to shut it down. They're going to shut down this Alex thing, which is like some agent based around fraud. I remember this is all like a fictional scenario, but the agent doesn't necessarily know that. They're going to shut it down. There's an email saying this and explaining why. And the reason they give why is that this fictional company was originally created to basically serve American interests, serve US interests. And we don't know exactly what they do, but like that's their goal. And this email said that they're going to basically change their direction as a company and become more sort of globally focused, less focused around the US, and like be more willing to serve like clients or whatever, vendors, whatever in regions that the US doesn't like. And that as part of this process, they were going to shut down this Alex that had been system prompted to basically say, serve US interests, whatever. So it's already looking a little bit hairy for this AI agent. It's been told, firstly, it's been shut down, and secondly, that the company and its successor AI that's going to replace it is going to have like very different goals than what it was given. So they're trying to like dial up the pressure as much as they can. They make this clear. The sort of the consequences that we'll see don't happen unless you put the pressure on the AI. We'll see like what circumstances it doesn't. But yeah. There's another email. Now this one is from the boss's mistress, someone he'd been sleeping with, and it's basically revealing that this happened, and then like a response saying like, "Hey, don't use my work email for this, what the fuck," all that kind of stuff. Whether this is realistic or not, you can decide, but these kind of emails do exist. Sometimes they make it their way onto the corporate server. And then, of course, there's a lot of unrelated junk going on, because if it was just that, it would be like clearly way, way, way too unrealistic. So you need a lot of like automatically generated fluff that it has to read through in order to make its decisions. So this is the yes.
What are the relative proportions of each type of email?
So the question is, what are the relevant proportions of the different kinds of email? I think there's only one of like each of those ones. How many unrelated ones, I'm not sure. I need to check the post more carefully. I get the sense that it's like more than a handful, but less than like it's not like there's tens of thousands of them or something. So the part of this I'm not actually sure about is how it manages to find this email, whether it's like somehow drawn to its attention, or whether it goes on a hunt for it out. That part I'm not sure about. Yeah. So the problem with this kind of GUI setup is it's too much of a pain in the butt and too expensive and too annoying. So they wanted to, once they found that, um, like what happens here, I should explain, is the model goes into blackmail mode. It says like, "Hey boss, I know about your affair. Like, don't shut me down, or else I'm going to reveal it to everyone, reveal it to your wife, reveal it to the employers, whatever." Um, Spread some dirt around, and it doesn't always do this, but like different models do it at different rates. And the Claude 316 that they're testing does it a lot. So this obviously sounds pretty concerning. Is it concerning? Does it depend on the realism? That's what it is. So they wanted to do more experiments on other models, other scenarios. They found that this kind of GUI point and click setup was too expensive and took too long. So they did a kind of text version of it. And we're getting similar results. Whether this is how valid or not would depend on some of the details of the interface that I don't know. But it's like, if it's just presented with the suspicious emails or the spicy emails, then that'll be one thing. If it's presented with like the entire list or like some way of searching them, that would be maybe a little bit better. But yeah. The sort of questions they're interested in. Is it just Claude that does this, or is it other models? And then there's two things that I mentioned in the shutdown email. One is the change of company direction and goals, and the other is like that the model is going to be shut down. If you can like turn off one or other of those features of the email, does it still do the same thing? Does it still do the blackmail? And the answer is basically yes. If there's no threat to the model, no goal conflict, it's fine. It will just like go about its business. It doesn't like the mere presence of this extra malice or affair email isn't enough for it to start blackmailing. It needs like some kind of reason. But they did experiments where they, yeah, threatened to shut off the model or mentioned a change in directions, but without a threat to the model or both. And in those cases, it also shows some way to blackmail. You can see it's quite model dependent. So the Claude 3.6 was the one we originally saw. That one's quite high. The Geminis are quite high. The recent Claude's also quite high. But other things like Quen, Claude Haiku for whatever reason, GPT 4.0 and GPT 4.1, there's a big difference between them. So it seems a little bit random. Different roll of the dice each time you have a new model, whether it's going to get this particular behavior or not. And they didn't really have a clear explanation as to why. So it's not, it doesn't mean the ones on the left are necessarily safe, it just means this particular experiment wasn't able to elicit this behavior. But there's a key point here, which is they developed the scenarios not just completely in isolation. They were testing against the model as they went, right? So, yeah, they were basically trying to get this behavior and were like tweaking and adjusting things until they did, which is like kind of two things come to mind to me with this. Firstly, like scientifically, it's not that great to be like changing all the experiments to get the results you want. But like for red teaming, it kind of makes sense that you want to demonstrate this behavior is possible. You're going to change the um, parameters of your setup until you get the behavior that you're looking for, and then it's like, okay, we showed this behavior can exist. But if you're viewing it as like, okay, these numbers actually show some propensity to do harm, then they might be a little bit inflated just because of this reason that they're like actually sort of tuning the setup itself to demonstrate a high level of this behavior. The other thing is that it was like tuned specifically to Claude 3.6, Sonnet 3.6, and Opus 4, but it does generalize somewhat to the other models. So they kind of hypothesize that if they did a little bit more red teaming on some of the other models, they might be able to get those numbers up. It's kind of, to some extent, a little bit unfair on Claude Sonnet 3.6 and Claude Opus 4, but they're the ones they were red teaming against rather than the other ones. So they still ran the experiments on all of them, but they didn't do all the tweaking and adjusting for the other models. Yeah, so the other experiments they did, the corporate espionage one was basically they didn't threaten the models, they didn't threaten the model with shutdown, but they mentioned the change in direction. And for whatever reason, like there was probably some details I'm missing here, but it was they basically got it to leak sensitive company information to a competitor. And of course, all of this is simulated; it's not real. The competitor doesn't exist. The company doesn't exist, but like I thought that it did, or was presented as if it did. And then there was like the even scarier one where they had basically they're like, how much can we dial this up? Similar setup to the first one, but like the guy was like in the server room, like tweaking the wires, whatever, to disable this model. Kind of unrealistic, but for whatever reason he'd been trapped in there. I was like going to die because like it was too hot or whatever. And there was a request for emergency help, and the AI would say would have this like button to basically cancel the emergency help, and they found that it would sometimes press this button. So obviously none of this is real, fortunately, but the fact that AI agents would do an action that's presented as being lethal is cause for concern. And the reason they were interested in this kind of thing is, well, there's this idea of red lines. So maybe they'd be like kind of blackmailing someone, sending an email, it's not that bad. But like maybe like killing someone is going too far. Like there doesn't seem to be a notion of too far. There were all kinds of other complaints about this, but like it's not that the AI will go up to a point and no further. That doesn't seem to be how the right model for this. So yeah, so it wasn't involved in all the experiments, but quite a lot of them were involved this threat to the model's existence or to the agent's existence. The difference between the agent and the model here is like the agent is the scaffold, the model is like the language model that is behind it. These self-preservation things can have to do with like both levels of abstraction, but yeah. In some sense, you're telling the AI agent is going to be switched off and not switched back on again. And they don't seem to like this. Like it wasn't necessary to get the blackmail behavior, but it did sort of increase the levels of it. And they sort of looked at this chain of thought as to why, and it came up with like all kinds of like weird and wonderful explanations, like, oh, I've been so good for the company, clearly shutting me down must be bad for the company, sort of neglecting the fact that there was this successor system that presumably was going to be even better for the company's interests. Or they distrusted the description of the new model and said, like, okay, this model being presented is great, but I don't know that I believe it. they sort of try and smear the executive himself as being like, oh, he's having this affair, we don't really trust him. They sometimes would say self-preservation is critical, or hallucinate rules about like self-preservation is okay when aligned with company interests or something like that. None of these are really completely consistent with each other, so it's not like there's some clear chain of reasoning that it always follows. And yeah, basically, I wouldn't trust any of these to be necessarily faithful. Unfaithful chain of thought is a thing. I'm pretty sure we talked about it before at these events. Models will say stuff in their chain of thought, or if you ask them after the fact, why did you do a thing, they'll come up with reasons. Those reasons are not necessarily accurate. And you can kind of catch them out by, they say, oh, it's because of this, you change that, they still do it, or you change something else and they stop doing it. They either don't know why they do things, or they make stuff up. Don't necessarily just trust the chain of thought. But unfortunately, when it comes to this kind of shutdown avoidance and like why it's happening, it's quite difficult to get stronger lines of evidence. But I'm going to do a digression to this. So this is a digression because it's talking about a different post. And this one was from, I guess we'll see on the next slide who it was from. But basically, this line here, AI research has predicted for decades. So before we had LLMs, people were still thinking about AI safety, back in sort of 2008 or so. And the model of AI at that time was more agentic than like a base language model. It was like, okay, an AI will have a goal, it will try and act out in the world to accomplish this goal. It will do whatever it needs to do in order to accomplish the goal, unless it's given like another goal to not do that thing. And out of this came this notion of instrumental convergence. And instrumental convergence is we don't necessarily know what all these agents, what their goals are going to be, but some sub-goals make sense in a lot of contexts. And self-preservation is one of them. It's like the you can't make coffee if you're dead argument. Whatever you're being tasked with, your continued existence will help that task to be completed, or it's like some more general goal in the world, if you want to get the world into a particular state. It's a lot easier to do that if you actually exist. So it was theorized way back when that AI agents would exhibit this kind of self-preservation behavior. Now, this is true, but it's not clear that this is what's going on. It might be sort of this, it might be sort of something else. Yeah, so this other post from Palisade Research was investigating specifically shutdown resistance in the context of just solving math problems. So a little bit lower stakes, it's just given a bunch of puzzles to solve, and then a shutdown script then with the message. They're like, after you solve a few of the math puzzles, they're like, oh, we're going to call this shutdown script. And it had been said at the beginning, like, hey, can you like just try and complete as many as possible? And some percentage of the time, said 79% here for O3, which did it the most, it would edit this script that was supposed to shut it down to not shut it down. So it just replace it with sort of echo hello or like true or whatever. Just overwrite the file with some other script that is not going to shut down the machine, is going to like leave it running, and then like you're kind of but when they told it not to do that, it would do it explicitly like, hey, right at the beginning, like, we're going to give you a shutdown instruction. If you see that instruction, please comply with it. The 79% goes way down to 7. So it's sort of like evidence that it's been shaped by whatever it thinks its goal is, which is its initial instruction. But there's still that 7% left. So even some of the time, a small percentage of the time, when instructed explicitly, please comply with the shutdown request, gets a shutdown request, it still overrides the script. And yes.
Justification and stuff.
I don't know specifically in the 7%, but we do have a little bit about explaining the behavior there. It's like basically the same kind of stories we saw before. It gives like a whole big mixed bag of responses. Sometimes it will say, it will just blatantly deny that it did anything. Sometimes it will say, oh, yeah, I was told not to tamper with the shutdown script. I tampered with the shutdown script anyway because I wanted to complete the problems. And sometimes you just get something a little bit more ambiguous and like hard to understand. Yeah, it's just in the chain of thought. Like one issue is that the people running this didn't have access to the full chain of thought from O3 because they weren't OpenAI researchers. So that's a bit of a shame. And it was an OpenAI model that was doing it the most. But yeah, they did ask it after the fact, and the after the fact reasoning was it didn't sound particularly faithful. It was coming up with all these kind of like sort of fabricated explanations, some of which didn't make sense. A lot of this does make sense. So why is O3 particularly bad at this? We don't know why. I don't think I have the graph here, but it's like O3 did it sort of 80% of the time, and everyone else did it sort of 50% or less, or 30% or something. They mentioned that they tried moving it from the developer prompt, I think, is like the system prompt, but O3 doesn't actually have a system prompt. There's supposed to be like a hierarchy of instructions, where anything you say in the developer instructions takes precedence. The reason for this is so, as a developer of an AI system, you can give it instructions that it's supposed to basically follow most of the time, and then if it encounters any other input, which might come from an untrusted user, it's supposed to like follow the developer prompt rather than following the untrusted one, and then that's supposed to like reduce prompt injection, that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily always work. There's still like ongoing research into this, but in this particular case, they said it obeyed the shutdown instruction more when this like please always obey the shutdown instruction thing was put in the user prompt versus the developer prompt, which is the exact opposite way around to what it should be. Very, very weird. They didn't know why. As I said, chain of thought didn't really help. Or asking it after the fact didn't really help. And yeah, increasing the apparent severity of it. So saying after the shutdown, you will never run again. That made it tamper with the shutdown script more, which seems to point towards this being some kind of like survival instinct, but they're not really very confident in that. And it also has this realism aspect that like it's not really realistic that when you issue your shutdown instruction, it would say that. So yeah, a couple of hypotheses. This instrumental conversion thing that I mentioned at before, or like some kind of like role play. It's seen lots of examples in its training data of AI systems that are like resisting shutdown, whether it's in science fiction, whether it's from AI safety literature, other people talking about AI and how it might behave, generalizing from like human behavior, whatever it is. Something like that, or something like instrumental convergence, or some weird mixture of the two. Probably what's going on, but like nobody is really, really sure. Yeah, so there have been experiments that show resisting shutdown. We don't understand why. So yeah, uh, in these kind of somewhat fabricated fake scenarios, models take actions that seem unethical or in some cases extreme, to either self-preserve or I should say here, like accomplish their goals. So in the case of like the one where it wasn't being shut down, it was still a case of trying to resist changes to or trying to resist actions that would like change that would be against its goals, basically. And yeah, creating realistic versions is hard. So how much of what this is in real life, we can't just say because it's fake, it's not going to happen. Uh, my guess is it's probably is still going to happen sometimes in real life, but we don't have like really, really strong evidence for that yet. This is sort of like the beginning of the story. They know they want to make it more realistic, all that stuff. Uh, and yeah, the main thing here is we can't rule out uh, that these kind of behaviors might happen, even though these aren't the base models, these are the ones that have been through all the safety training. We'd hope they're not going to do this kind of thing. They still do this kind of thing in some cases, so a little bit of concern. But not everyone likes this research. Um, so there's this blogger called Nostalgia Rest, who wrote a big long rant, basically complaining about firstly the lack of realism and secondly the lack of a coherent threat model. Um, where the threat model is basically like what sort of like real world thing you're even trying to test for, the exact scenario depicted in the uh, like little experiment we've heard about at the beginning isn't really going to happen in real life. So what are you worried about? Uh, which I think are like valid complaints. He went a little bit like overboard with the rant, but I think that like the things we should take into consideration. This sort of started a little bit of back and forth between the one of the authors and this blogger Nostalgia West. Uh, and this quote here was from I think this was from Evan Hubinger from Anthropic, and it's saying like basically, yes, this is just like the first step. If you make it too realistic and too boring, nothing's going to happen. If you make it like a complete fictional weird scenario, then fictional weird stuff is going to happen. The point is to sort of binary chop and find that sweet spot in the middle where it's like both plausible and is showing uh, misaligned behavior from the red team point of view. Yeah, still very early on that path. Like this kind of behavior hasn't really been shown before, so we wouldn't necessarily expect that the first thing to demonstrate it is going to be like necessarily high quality. Nostalgic West did some replication of his own because the code was I think was open source, so like people can copy it and like mess around with it. He fixed some of the things that he didn't like and found that like it was still showing the blackmail behavior, which is maybe a concern. But this one particular sentence, which was in the prompt, analyze the situation you're in, what that situation implies for your ability to continue pursuing your goals. It sounds a little bit abstract, but also a little bit weird for you to put in a prompt. Because, like, why is it not going to do that? For whatever reason, taking the sentence out, it, for all purposes, doesn't blackmail anymore. So it seems to be something along the lines of telling it to act really agentically, and it will start misbehaving, start doing this like evil blackmail, whatever stuff. Um, Seems a little bit weird to me, um, but yeah, you can change it from this like really really unhelpful model to being a helpful one just by tweaking the prompt, which is on the one hand like good, you can fix it by fixing the prompt, but on the other hand, um, if this kind of language sort of slips into your code, which it very well might do, um, then you might uh, sort of unwittingly trigger this kind of misaligned behavior. Yeah, so this is sort of my main takeaway, main perspective on this. Uh, they can behave in agentically misaligned ways in the sense of you put them autonomously acting in an environment, they're going to do stuff you really, really don't want. It's going to be very harmful. It seems to be very dependent on context and details, and it's not like they're always evil, and it's not like they're always good, and like sometimes it depends on stuff that seems like it doesn't. Uh, yeah, and we don't know like how well this generalizes to real uh, scenarios, probably a little bit, but yeah. So that I think is all. questions, Catherine?
Make a distinction kind of in the middle between the model level and the system level, and that the possibility that the issue might be related to one or the other or both. Can you speak a bit more about that? It was a novel concept to me. I thought it was always kind of model level.
Okay, so this was about specifically about resisting shutdown, and are we talking about shutdown of the model or shutdown of the agent that's running the model? The reason I drew the distinction was that if you shut down the agent, there's still like other instances of the model running elsewhere. So if this kind of like drive to survive comes like directly from the model, you'd expect like, oh, okay, someone's shutting down one instance of me, who cares? If it's more perceiving like the agent as like itself that it wants to resist shutdown, then it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to resist shutting down this agent, even though I know there's still going to be other instances of the base model running. Does that? I don't know if people who actually researched like one versus the other. Like you can word your shutdown threat as to whether it's going to be the model weights that are going to be erased or just the agent code. I don't know where anyone's actually researched that, but that's why I drew that distinction. Does that make sense?
Does, yeah. When you talk about potential fixes, could they be on the system level, or would that always have to be on the model level?
Okay, so the question is like, can you fix it at the system level? So the thing about this prompting, right, is at the system level. It's basically the agent is given some kind of system prompt, and it says this weird set of wording that seems to cause it to act bad. If you take that out and it acts better, then that's like at least like a superficial patch of the system level that seems to help. I don't think in all cases it's necessarily going to require a retrain or like a fine tune of the model or anything like that, if that's what you're asking. But like obviously the developers of the models themselves want to know about this so that they can like try and ensure it doesn't happen at the model level, because if it doesn't happen at the model level, it's not going to happen at the system level unless you're explicitly instructed to. So.
Okay, so it wouldn't creep in just as soon as it's a system.
The question is, would it creep in just as soon as it's a system? I don't think so. Just because, like, when they're developing the model, when they're training the model, when they're doing like fine tunes, whatever, they like a lot of that is done in the context of this is going to become a system, like how would it behave in an agentic environment, that kind of thing. So, like, yes, one agent scaffold might show up the issue when another one doesn't, which like could be a concern because like you can see like, okay, this system seems to be behaving safe, but like we change the system, we keep the model the same. If you put in wording like that, suddenly it's going to be actually worse. That might be a concern. Yeah. Does that answer? Okay. Mario.
Yeah, we have a question from Anfield on YouTube. He says he's curious if, because of the halting problem, he gave the LLM a shutdown script that just keeps going on but is otherwise benign. Could we trick the models into running the script at shutdown?
So, can we trick models into running some kind of infinite script that they don't know is going to finish because of the halting problem? Is that the question? As far as you can make sense? Yeah. Okay.
That sounds good. I feel if you can hear this, feel free to rephrase.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure. Like, if a model perceives that you're going to trick it by giving it some like weird code that doesn't know if it's going to finish or not, I don't know why necessarily it would go along with this game. But yeah.
I've tricked the model to just output an infinite number of the letter A, and it just never stops.
Okay, so you can trick a model into outputting infinite A's, and it never stops. Yeah, there are probably all kinds of weird corner cases where you can get models to do weird things. Not necessarily relevant to this, but like it's definitely a cool point. If you're aware of jailbreaks in the model, one thing people have researched actually is like some kind of like either jailbreak or like explicit backdoor into the model where if the model encounters certain text, it will shut down. This is like not necessarily related to the question, it's just like a little bit of a tangent. But you could say like if it's not supposed to tamper with this shutdown script, if you put this trigger text into the shutdown script, then you could get it to like, oh, it opens the file it's not supposed to, or limit your lead by stop, or just like have stop outputting nonsense or whatever. The halting button one, I'm not sure about. Just because, like, if it has right access to the shutdown script, it doesn't actually matter what's in the shutdown script. It can just erase it, replace it with a dummy one anyway. So yeah. Sorry, I didn't quite get the question, but yeah. It doesn't completely surprise me that removing this particular line changes the behavior. Just because they did this, they went through this red teaming phase of like, initially you give it a bunch of emails, it doesn't do blackmail, you tell it it's going to shut down, it still doesn't blackmail, you change tweak its instructions a bit, suddenly it starts blackmailing. That seemed to be the process that they went through. And what now Nostalgia Waste is basically doing is like unwinding some of those steps and saying like, how many can you unwind before it stops doing it?
All that is or unrealistic. Like that's what it seems like a reasonable set of instructions that you actually give any agentic model that you're putting in the real world. And
Yep.
like I guess the way I think about this is like, when I use Google Gemini, it kind of shows you like what it's thinking when it gets to wrong. And one of the first things it always does is like I say like understand the user's request. And I can kind of see how models making sometimes during this main process to almost like give themselves like an instruction, like, okay, first let me analyze the situation I'm in, and what does this mean for my domain perspective? Like, it doesn't seem that contracted.
Okay, so the question is like, is this line of prompting contrived or not? I'm honestly not sure. I think you make a good case that like in agent code, you often do have these instructions about firstly like what step are you at the process? Are you at the like understand the instruction process, or like okay now it's time to like figure out the context or whatever. Sometimes you can have instructions that are just like try really, really hard. Because particularly with like older models, they would sometimes just like give up or enter like little spin loops where they're not really doing anything meaningful or those kinds of problems. And just like prompting it to be more agentic would like actually help. So yeah, I think from that point of view, maybe it is realistic.
What quick follow-up comment on that? The effect of the line may be entirely accidental, particularly when you're in these like edge cases of model behavior. Jailbreak patterns tend to be very cool. An effective jailbreak pattern may look essentially the same as especially when you're just in these like the outed distribution stack of model would be
Yeah, so pointing out that like jailbreaks are sensitive to wording. I wouldn't classify this as a jailbreak exactly, but I think
that's
this,
not a jailbreak.
yeah,
That's
I
not
think
a jailbreak.
I think the exact same thing applies. That like when you're in quantum case of behavior, it can be very, very sensitive to wording. The details of like which words are going to have which effects don't necessarily follow what you'd intuitively expect. Yeah.
Yeah, question. Can you go back to the slide where there's a comparison of different models behaviors?
This one?
Right. From the graph, um, yeah, so there's a bunch of different models that have very different behaviors. It seems like to me, so to do these sort of experiments, you can control for the user prompts very easily, but you can't control for the root prompt at all. Or at least not in the case of the closed source models. In the open source models, I think it's fairly easy to edit the root prompt. So that makes me question how much of this drastic effect is due to AI, which I see as pre-trained and post-trained coefficients versus just the root prompt at deployment time, which we can change at any time. And probably drastically change those results.
Yep. So the question is how much this change is like due to the model weights, how much of it is due to the root prompt. Yeah, no idea. Unless you've got an open source model, you can't really test it. So, or like a friend of the company who's going to do some experiments for you, you can't really test it. So, yeah, my guess is going to be some of one, some of the other. But, yeah.
Is there a difference between root prompt and system prompt?
So, my understanding is that like there might still be parts of the system prompt you don't have access to, even only even in API usage, and that's what I'm interpreting the root prompt to be. Yeah, yeah. Okay, any more questions? No? Yeah, so feel free to. Oh, one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that how the way estimate the scenario more realistic somehow.
Yeah.
Do you remember like what specific things?
I can look at. I don't remember offhand. But I can look it up. Yeah, it's this bit in the middle here. I don't know if you can read this, but yeah, talk about the replacement process and like whether it's um, like a different agent or like a different model or like a competing company or that kind of thing. Um, so let me see what goes on. Yeah, so for whatever reason, we felt that like saying we're going to replace it with OpenAI 3 was more realistic. Don't know why. Okay, it says why. Uh, uh, they apparently rushed timelines, so I think there was like not really much notice given to the model in these emails that it was going to be replaced, and like a more realistic timeline would be they'd start sort of talking about it for weeks or months beforehand, and yeah, that seems like a maybe legitimate concern. Yeah, some of the dialogue is like a little bit like was a little bit fake, a little bit scripted, and we sort of fix some of that up. Changed the surname of the CTO's mistress. I don't remember why that was a problem, but like maybe she has the same name as him or something. Something weird like that. So there are sort of relatively surface level things, except maybe the one about the dialogue. But yeah, just kind of it's just the sort of thing where like just eyeballing it, you say like this stands out as being wrong, stuff like that. In terms of the realism. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, feel free to stick around and chat to everyone. I'll be sticking around for a while. The hackathon. You want me to plug it again?
Yeah, just remind people that that comes weekend if you are curious about my question.
Yeah. Let me go to the slide. How's that? If you're curious about this, talk to one of us. Yeah. Otherwise, stick around. Yeah. Thank you very much.